kind of ice cream did you get?
Fresh peach. Better eat it right away. It's starting to run a little.
Cut! In the summer of 1990, Disney gave us one of the most dazzling, grotesque, and just all-around bizarre summer comic book blockbusters Hollywood had ever seen. And as wild as Dick Tracy was on screen,
Walnuts.
it doesn't hold a candle to what went down behind the scenes.
Don't you have a responsibility? I don't have a responsibility to the public.
Superstar egos, big-budget lawsuits, tabloid-fueled romances, and a marketing machine that was all too willing to give everyone a front row seat.
Don't hide back there, Warren. Get over here.
But the deeper we dig, the stranger and more mysterious things get.
We haven't spoken in a while.
And it starts to become clear
Always denying that.
just how big of an impact that Disney's Dick Tracy had
All's fair in love and business.
on the future of Hollywood.
Dick Tracy has been cloaked in secrecy since it began production last spring.
So here we are, looking down the barrel of yet another summer movie season, trying to figure out which big-budget films we're actually interested in seeing.
The summer's success could reverse a years-long trend as studios have struggled to get people back into theaters.
Even with the long list of options, each specially tuned to appeal to a specific audience, it's hard not to feel like we've seen it all before.
The remake of Lilo and Stitch, making almost $960 million.
And it's always this time of year that I can't help but think back to 1990 in the summer of Dick Tracy, a film that's impossible to watch and not wonder how this got made, especially at Disney. Not only that, but how does a simple comic strip from 1931 go on to help shape Hollywood almost a century later? Well, like so many of the best mysteries, it involves a dick, a dame, and a megalomaniacal multimedia corporation. It was a simpler time. A time when an aging Hollywood legend could take control of an even less relevant comic book franchise and turn it into the largest movie in the world.
It's got Batman beat, hands down.
A time when one of music's biggest performers could use her limited role as the blonde bombshell to blur the lines of reality and help launch her into the cultural stratosphere.
This is Dick Tracy. Can we have a big hand for Dick?
A time when Disney was in full-on sprint mode and willing to look past some obvious red flags, all to chase down the next comic book blockbuster.
I want to find Lips Manless fast.
With a handful of walnuts?
Yeah, with a handful of walnuts?
And even though Dick Tracy has largely been forgotten about by the general audience, we can thank it and all the chaos that happened after its release for how summer blockbusters are handled to this day.
This may get messy.
Wait a minute, Dad. I haven't finished Dick Tracy.
You can't read.
Of course, we've gotta start our investigation with the origins of Dick Tracy. And not only just so that we can get a sense of the absolute carnage, chaos, and corruption that birthed this character, but also the fact that this really was one of the first and biggest multimedia franchises. You see, in the era of Prohibition, colorful criminals ruled the streets, becoming front-page fixtures and managing to always be one step ahead of the law.
These fellas bootleg machine guns like they bootleg booze. Yeah, they better do something about that. Because with these toys to play with, what happened before will look like a teapot.
As a response, cartoonist Chester Gould developed a way to give the public the justice that they craved in the form of a daily comic strip. Detective Dick Tracy, a tough-as-nails lawman with a relentless pursuit of organized crime.
What'll I do? What'll I do? I know. I'll call Dick Tracy, the famous detective. That's it. Give me Dick Tracy. Hello, Dick Tracy. Yes, Dick Tracy speaking. Well, listen, Duck. Hey! What's the matter with me? I'm Duck Tracy!
The strip was an instant hit and almost immediately began to be pushed across the spectrum of media, with Dick Tracy the radio program, Dick Tracy the comic book, Dick Tracy the movie serial, the children's book, the feature film, the TV show, and the animated series.
Dick Tracy calling Go-Go Gomez. We need Stooge to get a conviction.
See, I bring him back quick, Senor Tracy.
And of course, a steady stream of toys and cards and various other licensed products accompanied each and every new entry.
I'll draw my Dick Tracy Snub Nose 38 and I'll spill.
Well, let's get back.
Then I'll pull back the bolt and I'll blast my way out.
But while the 30s, 40s, and 50s had seen Dick Tracy elevated to icon status, the 1960s and 1970s weren't so kind.
Dick Tracy, he's a good cop.
Changes in the media landscape mixed with the counterculture movement left the good guy with the gun setup feeling extremely dated.
There are many sides to Serpico. A hero who was hated, a loner who was loved, and to some people, the most dangerous man alive. An honest cop.
And while Chester Gould was still churning out daily comic strips throughout much of the 70s, his attempts to modernize the series veered into unusual territory.
Tracy married his long-suffering girlfriend, Tess Trueheart. Their adopted son, Junior, went out of this world to marry Moon Maid, and their daughter, Honeymoon, was born on September 12, 1965.
But then, a significant spike in violent crime throughout the 1980s surged across the United States. Rival gangs and cartels were all fighting each other over the distribution of a new ultimate vice for a new era of gang violence.
This is crack cocaine. It's as innocent looking as candy, but it's turning our cities into battle zones.
We have a war, a shooting war, not in the Middle East right now. We have it on the streets of every major city in this country.
And with all of this came the return of the tough-as-nails police officer as the ultimate Hollywood good guy.
I'm a hero of the new world.
You're a disease, and I'm the cure.
Drop it!
At this point, it was no longer a question of if, but when, the Dick with the yellow hat would spring back into action.
I'm on my way.
By the time the 80s rolled around, the wheels to get Dick Tracy back on the big screen had already been put into motion. But despite the big studios and even bigger names attached, nothing really stuck. Film rights had been sold to producers who had signed on with Paramount, and things had started moving forward on a more modern and violent take on the character. Disagreeing with this approach, though, was a man that the studio was determined to have as their lead actor, a Hollywood legend who had grown up reading the adventures of Dick Tracy and believed with every fiber of his being that any film made should follow the same classic style and morality that had guided the original comic strip.
There were two little cartoon pictures that I saw the moment I decided to do it. One was Dick Tracy hit a guy and he knocked his hat off, and the caption said, "Take that, you cockroach." And the other one had Tess Trueheart standing with her hands on her hips saying, "Dick Tracy, are you asking me to marry you?" And when I looked at those two things, I thought, I gotta make a movie of this. This could be fun.
And as their creative disagreement grew more and more intense, Warren Beatty was determined to get his way, even if it meant letting this version of the film fall apart and rebuilding a Dick Tracy film all on his own.
Warren wants us to take a chance. He wants us to go out on a limb. He doesn't want us to come up with something that's straightforward and safe.
By 1985, all progress on getting any kind of Dick Tracy film made had ground to a halt. Paramount had given up. Producers and directors had moved on to other projects, and so everyone was just content to let the film and TV rights lapse. Everyone except for Warren Beatty, who still had faith that his version of a stylized 1930s throwback could thrive in a sea of over-the-top violent police work.
You're done. End of story.
After patiently waiting for these other projects to fall apart and the rights to be available again, Beatty swooped in with a check for $3 million. From now on, if anyone wanted to make a Dick Tracy film or TV show, they would have to go through him. And as luck would have it, his timing was perfect. Paramount executives Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg had just made the move over to Disney to rehabilitate the films division. Their plan? Partner with some of the biggest names in Hollywood, give them a modest budget, a strict deadline, and just let them cook.
It is essential to maintain the old, to respect the old, to replenish the old, to enhance the old, to modernize the old, and to make that move forward. At the same time, it's essential to do what I'm sure Walt Disney himself would have done, which is to experiment with every new and innovative kind of entertainment possible.
And even with a movie like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which went wildly over schedule and budget, Disney showed that they could still turn lemons into lemonade, but only if a film was both high quality and marketed exceptionally well.
Just for the taste.
Roger, what are you doing here?
Please, Eddie, I just came to see Jessica and to have a Diet Coke.
Which brings us back to Detective Tracy. While at Paramount, executive Jeffrey Katzenberg recognized the appeal of pairing the nostalgia of the character with the prestige of someone like Warren Beatty. And now, as the chairman of Walt Disney Studios, Katzenberg had all the power of the House of Mouse to turn just about any family-friendly film into a merchandising machine. The colorful characters and vintage vibes of Dick Tracy seemed like a perfect fit.
I think they have designed something that is completely and utterly unique and original, and that's the most exciting thing that you can do in movies.
There was only one big problem. Since acquiring the rights, Warren Beatty had repackaged the film with him not only as the star, but also as the producer and the director. And that was something that Disney was terrified of. Because if Beatty's past was any indication, they had one of the industry's most difficult personalities behind the wheel of what could possibly be one of their next big franchises.
We're trying to keep our expectations modest.
But if Disney could just find a way to keep the wheels of this runaway bus attached for long enough, maybe, just maybe, it would all be worth it. But what was it exactly that made Warren Beatty such a polarizing figure in the 1980s? Someone that studios feared, but were still more than happy to do business with. For Beatty, it all came down to reputation.
This is Warren Beatty. He starred on Broadway. This is his first movie role. You won't forget him.
Warren Beatty made his film debut in 1961 and became an instant star. He spent the decade in roles that leaned into his good looks and charm. But in 1967, that all changed with Bonnie and Clyde, a film he didn't just star in, but also produced, which wasn't in any way typical at the time.
My interest in those people was what ultimately resulted in her poetry that gave them some sort of immortality, or at least they felt it was immortality.
The result was both a smashing success and a transition point for both Warren Beatty and the industry. Bonnie and Clyde helped ignite the new Hollywood movement, showing that audiences were ready for stylish violence, moral ambiguity, and visionary directors outside of the studio system.
The cinema of the 70s really started in 1967 with the release of Bonnie and Clyde.
For Beatty, this film skyrocketed his standing in Hollywood, and he never looked back. Throughout the 70s, he was involved in some of the era's biggest hits, always acting, sometimes producing, and somehow also finding time to write and direct. By the end of the decade, Beatty had racked up nominations in nearly every major category, and finally won Best Director for Reds, his controversial and wildly over-budget passion project.
I think that it reflects more particular credit on the freedom of expression that we have in our American society and the lack of censorship that we have from the government or the people who put up the money.
And right then, at arguably the height of his success, Warren Beatty just kind of disappeared. While he was working on various projects in the background, including Dick Tracy, it would be 6 whole years before we'd see him pop up again in 1987's Ishtar.
The enormous $44 million budget created and paid for so many complexities, so many delays, so many retakes during the filming that a fragile thing like humor was just beaten out of the script. They were just too exhausted by the end of this project.
This is a shocking film.
Even though he only produced and starred in it, Ishtar was still tagged as Warren Beatty's first major failure. The film was such a flop that it instantly put into question his place within the modern-day film business. Maybe, like what happens with many of the greats, the industry had just moved on.
Where the budget kind of went south for the most part was the fact that like Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman kind of like had their full freight on the movie. So Dustin Hoffman got his high, big salary. Warren Beatty got his high, big salary. And so now...
And all the accoutrements that go with it.
And everything that goes with it.
Worse, Ishtar put Beatty under a magnifying glass. For decades, he'd mystified the public, being known as a controlling perfectionist on set and one of Hollywood's most notorious womanizers off of it.
You were a lover of his.
For a minute and a half. Except later, he calls me after I don't even know how long. And he goes, "Hey, Cher, it's Warren." I go, "Hey, how are you?" He said, "You want to go to dinner?" And I went, "Well, I have a boyfriend." He said, "You want to go to lunch?"
Yeah, right.
In his personal life, Beatty was recognized as one of the most notorious ladies' men of his generation. Each and every week, the media would run wild with some new romantic entanglement he was involved in. And with each and every new film, Beatty somehow ended up dating his co-star, at least until filming had wrapped.
You have a history of falling in love with your leading ladies. Is that part of the excitement and the creativity of working? Or do you work with somebody whom you're already attracted to?
Well, as you know, I'm not going to answer that kind of question.
You know?
All of this to say that by the time Disney was deciding on whether to pull the trigger on Dick Tracy in the late 1980s, Warren Beatty leading the project was seen as a risky bet. And their biggest hesitation was the money. There was just no way that they could allow the kind of budget overruns that had occurred on his recent films. So Disney approached Beatty with a deal. $25 million for the budget, and anything spent over that would come out of his own paycheck.
You know, Disney's a very, very tightly run operation, so...
The reported budget on Dick Tracy is $30 million. So in addition to performances, you have to worry about the expenditures here.
I think we spend too much time thinking about what things cost. We're obsessed with money, how much money it makes, how much money it costs.
But you can't blame a studio at a time. I mean, you know, they got to eat, too.
Yeah, they got to eat, but I think they should take care of their eating, and we should take care of whether or not we like the movies, and whether we like the movies we make and the ones we want to see.
A budget with strings attached wasn't exactly something that Warren Beatty was used to, but he ended up agreeing to it anyway, because for him, Dick Tracy wasn't just the next entry into his already legendary filmography, and it had become more than just a nostalgic character from his youth. For Warren Beatty, Dick Tracy was his big opportunity to show the world that he still had what it takes to make it in Tinseltown.
He's a perfectionist, so he takes like lots and lots of takes and tries different ways and everything. It bugs everyone. Towards the end of the movie, everyone is a little ornery.
Other than, you know, an endless amount of takes, what exactly does it mean to be a perfectionist director-producer? Well, in the case of Warren Beatty, it meant surrounding himself with some of the biggest and most talented people in the industry, many of whom were personal friends who had grown accustomed to his hypercritical style. And for Dick Tracy, you'd better believe that Beatty went all out and called in as many favors as he possibly could. Before too long, an impossible mix of A-list stars and character actors had been assembled.
I think the pressure on Warren, for some reason, is that he's not allowed to be good. He has to be brilliant.
Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Mandy Patinkin, Paul Sorvino, Dick Van Dyke, and a seemingly endless array of cameos.
I'll take my chances alone.
Behind the camera, Beatty had brought in an award-winning crew that had worked on films like Apocalypse Now, The Last Emperor, Barry Lyndon, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and of course his own film, Reds.
Behind it all is a production team that reads like a directory of innovative movie makers, with 68 Academy Award nominations to its combined credit.
And this talent would be needed to achieve Warren Beatty's vision, because this wouldn't be your typical 1930s gangster flick. Beatty wanted Dick Tracy to look like a comic strip had come to life.
This has never been tried. Nobody's ever come near this. The dazzle of Dick Tracy's world begins with the colors, only 6 of them, matching the ink that newspapers use to print their Sunday comics.
Every yellow in this picture is the same yellow. Every red in this picture is the same red.
But even all of this wasn't enough for Warren Beatty. He wanted his film to sing, literally. Throwing it back to the 1930s big band era, music would be an integral part to the general vibe of Dick Tracy. And just like the cast and crew, Beatty hired all-stars with Danny Elfman, who was fresh off of composing the music for Batman, and legendary songwriter Stephen Sondheim to pen 5 songs that could not only be used for character development, but could also be heavily pushed in the marketing material. The only question was, who were they gonna find that had the talent, the range, and the stage presence to handle such high-profile songs? The team had considered going with someone like Michelle Pfeiffer or Sharon Stone, but they didn't quite have what he was looking for, and they were also a bit too expensive. What Warren Beatty really needed was a performer that wouldn't break the bank, but could still have everyone standing on their feet. And it didn't take long for him to land someone that would leave both him and the audience completely breathless.
What it all boils down to is that the people that we're in love with don't love us back. And that's easy to understand because that's how it happens in real life. You always love what you can't have.
By the late 80s, Madonna was already one of, if not the biggest names in entertainment and culture throughout the world. Songs like Material Girl and Like a Virgin had catapulted her up the music charts. Her videos had kept her an ever-present figure on MTV, and her ambitious global tours had made her a worldwide name.
Looking back on the 80s, I can only say that I didn't get there fast enough. I want more!
For Madonna, more really meant finding a way to break into acting in a way that was more than just a glorified cameo. She'd tried this before, but nothing had stuck.
Unfortunately, what we've seen from Madonna on the big screen has been less than memorable. Although she impressed critics and fans in Desperately Seeking Susan, her credits also include a low-budget skin flick and 2 big-budget box office flops.
I think she should stick to her singing. Her movies were never that great.
I'm not terribly impressed.
Dick Tracy offered a shot at credibility, high-level collaboration, and control. All things she did not want to miss out on. The Material Girl made both Beatty and Disney an offer they couldn't refuse. Cast her as the dangerously irresistible lounge singer Breathless Mahoney, and she would go on the kind of promotional blitz that the industry had never before seen, with photo shoots, TV appearances, an exclusive album, and even a global concert tour. The best part, though, she would agree to co-star in Dick Tracy and allow the film to take full advantage of her cultural superstardom for a little more than $1,400 a week.
No one else could play her part but me.
Warren Beatty was very taken by the offer, and depending on the source, it's not fully clear if he and Madonna had started dating immediately before or immediately after she was cast. But what quickly became crystal clear was that Madonna did get the role, and that she and Beatty definitely dated throughout the making of the film, and not a second longer.
What is it you like most about Mr. Beatty?
God, that's a tough one.
He's at home mad because you can't come up with an answer. Come on. You know, you said once in an interview that you liked a man that wasn't afraid to show his...
Okay, that's it. He's not...
And while the executives at Disney were just a tad nervous about how the sexual energy of Madonna would mesh with their family-friendly image, it was hard to argue against all the free publicity the power couple was attracting.
Do you want to talk at all off camera? You have nothing to say.
She doesn't want to live off camera. There's nothing to say off camera. Why would you say something if it's off camera?
And tomorrow, you're going to be...
What point is there of existing?
But all of this would soon become one of Disney's least concerning issues. Costs began to rise almost as soon as cameras began to roll. And there was also this other little comic book movie on the horizon. A movie that would dance with the devil in the pale moonlight and completely revolutionize the way that movie studios would market their blockbusters.
No, but they've gone nuts now because it's extended into other areas.
Tongue depressors, everything. Medical supplies.
Exactly.
Dick Tracy found itself wrapping up filming right when another major comic book hero was hitting the screen.
You remember that old saying, flying like a bat out of, well, you know the saying. Well, that's the way people are flocking to retail outlets to get their share of Batmania.
Batman's become hip and cool, and people can come out of the closet and admit that they read Batman and that comics are in vogue now.
And no matter where you were, it was just about impossible to escape that iconic yellow bat symbol.
More than 100 companies have been licensed to sell the Caped Crusader, not the movie, but the merchandise. Even his royal purple badness, Prince, has come out with the soundtrack. More hype for a movie that hasn't quite left the Batcave yet.
I think it's gonna be rad.
Really? What's rad?
Radical.
But Batmania wasn't just organic. It was engineered. Warner Brothers knew that they were gonna need to reintroduce their Boy in Black in a way that convinced everyone that this wasn't gonna be. They ended up pairing Tim Burton's vision with Prince's music, a loaded cast, and a licensing push that turned Batman into a brand.
And Warner Brothers is banking on the fact that the movie will only whet the appetites of real Bataholics. They've come out with mugs and a whole catalog of Batman memorabilia. In fact, there is even a 1-800-BATMAN number in here to get your merchandise to you faster.
And it worked. Batman quickly became one of the highest-grossing films of all time and solidified a template that all future comic book films would be judged against. Disney was convinced that they could build their own Tracy Mania. Same playbook, just in banana yellow instead of midnight black. But it wouldn't be easy, because even with Dick Tracy shaping up to be an absolute Hollywood juggernaut, it would have to survive one hell of a summer blockbuster season.
As usual, it's going to be a busy summer at the movies, but there's more potential hits than I've seen in a long while. And the trouble isn't going to be finding something to see. The trouble, it seems to me, will be having too much to choose from.
Leading up to Dick Tracy's 1990 summer release date, Disney was starting to get worried. Sure, the film had ballooned $15 million over budget, but that was the least of their concern. Like with Batman, the plan was for them to leverage Tracy Mania to bring an otherwise aging and out-of-touch character back into the mainstream. But now that everyone knew what films they'd actually be competing against,
a very competitive summer.
It was pretty clear that they'd now just need it to survive.
It's a good movie and it's original, and we hope we get a small cut of what seems to be a big pie.
In this case, surviving the summer movie season of 1990 meant kicking off one of the largest multimedia promotional campaigns the Walt Disney Company had ever attempted. A campaign that dwarfed both the budget of the actual film and, in many ways, what Batman had done just 1 year prior. They pushed everything: toys, video games, McDonald's tie-ins. They added a large live musical production to their theme parks.
If you love the movie, you'll love Dick Tracy Live this summer at Disneyland.
Warren Beatty did what he was famous for not doing and went on a giant publicity tour.
It deserves the kind of support that, a star like him can lend to it. And I think once he felt that way about it himself, he dove in, hook, line, and sinker.
I got lucky this time because Disney really knows how to get out and make all kinds of merchandise and raincoats and wristwatches and all this nonsense, which I think is terrific.
And Madonna? Madonna did exactly what she signed up for. An endless string of interviews, appearances, and a 3.5-month-long Blonde Ambition world tour, which of course was anchored by her exclusive album tied to the film.
What about Dick Tracy? Dick, that's an interesting name. Dick.
And while I'm Breathless went triple platinum in the USA alone, it's most remembered for debuting Sooner or Later, her award-winning collaboration with Stephen Sondheim, and also a little track you may have heard of, widely considered to be one of Madonna's biggest and best songs.
Madonna kicks off her U.S. tour down in Houston this weekend, and one of the highlights of her show, of course, will be her latest single, Vogue.
Tracy Mania was real. At least it sure did seem that way.
It was a good movie. That's basically all I can say about it.
But did it all pay off in the end? Well, things started out well, with Dick Tracy debuting as Disney's biggest opening weekend at the box office ever. From there, though, things quickly began to slide. Audiences and critics seemed to agree that while the film was incredible to look at, with cartoonish villains, amazing artistic design, and an over-the-top Al Pacino performance that's really something.
You like walnuts, don't you, big boy?
I love them. A lot of people like walnuts. They're good for the liver.
Yeah, but they're bad for the brain.
But Dick Tracy himself, his dialogue, and his entire story here is all pretty boring. And it didn't help that at 55 years old, Warren Beatty wasn't exactly audiences' ideal vision of a modern action-adventure star.
What do you think of Warren Beatty?
Very cute. I was just gonna say, he's very cute.
Yeah.
For an older man.
All of this led to the film quickly fizzling out at the box office, ending its 8-week run with a worldwide total at around $162 million. Not bad, but not great. And while Dick Tracy did end up bringing home Oscars for art direction, makeup, and best original song for Sooner or Later, Disney couldn't help but be disappointed that it didn't even come close to having the cultural impact and returns that Batman had experienced. And Beatty, he was disappointed that the film wasn't the comeback that he had hoped for, but he was also proud of the final product. He had stuck to his guns and made his version of Dick Tracy, a version that may have been a bit old-fashioned and may have stuck a bit too close to the source material. But if the suits at Disney weren't satisfied with the $160 million, well, they could go fuck it.
Very upsetting.
Now, normally this is where a trip down memory lane would end. Larger-than-life movie with a larger-than-life cast doesn't actually end up being larger-than-life. But that's not the case here, because believe it or not, it's what happens next that takes the whole Dick Tracy saga into seriously mysterious territory.
A bombshell memo from Disney has leaked.
Disney was not so thrilled with how their big-budget comic book blockbuster had turned out. The film quickly stalling out in the theaters meant that merchandise was left on shelves. A high-profile theme park ride would need to be scrapped. And there was absolutely no way any sequel would ever be allowed to move forward. At least, not at Disney. Dick Tracy was seen as such a setback for the studio that Chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg was forced to rethink Disney's entire approach to filmmaking. In an internal memo sent to the executive team, just 6 months after the film's release, he bemoaned the fact that Hollywood had become too obsessed with high-risk, high-reward blockbusters and high-caliber stars whose salaries were taking away too much of the profit. And his prime example? Dick Tracy. This is why, when Warren Beatty comes to us to pitch his next movie, we must hear what he has to say, then slap ourselves a few times, throw cold water on our faces, and soberly conclude that it's not a project we should choose to get involved in. Instead, his plan was to focus on a more balanced, less risky slate of films. Films that involved younger developing talent, both in front of and behind the camera. And when they did go big budget, Disney would be in control. And while you would think that this would spell the end of the throuple that was Dick Tracy, the House of Mouse, and Warren Beatty, the character surprisingly showed up in the 1995 Disney TV special, Nancy Kerrigan Dreams on Ice. And by show up, I mean that there's 2 entire segments sung and skated to the style of the 5-year-old film. And while Beatty thankfully wasn't starring as Dick Tracy, he still would have needed to sign off on the appearance because remember, he still owned the rights to all film and TV usage of the character. Which raises an important question. If Warren Beatty was so intent on having Tracy done his way, why exactly would he sign off on Disney using Dick Tracy in a glorified ice skating special, especially after the studio had raked him over the coals in that memo? It turns out, our first clues wouldn't start showing up until almost a decade later, where Warren Beatty finds himself in perhaps his biggest battle over Dick Tracy yet, and decides to fight back with a TV special so strange it aired only once on a premium cable network when nobody in their right mind would be watching TV.
Where does your grandmother live, Bernice?
Waukegan, Illinois.
Waukegan, I know it well.
By 2005, Warren Beatty's control over all film and television rights to Dick Tracy was coming to an end, and the original owners had already come to collect. The only way Beatty could keep these rights? He needed to start production on something with the character within the next 2 years. Otherwise, Tribune Media would reclaim all rights and immediately launch a new TV series, something they had already started early work on. In response, Beatty kicked off what was easily the strangest stunt of his entire career. First, he sued Tribune, claiming he fully intended to make a new Dick Tracy project before the clock ran out. In fact, he argued that the very existence of their series was making it harder for him to get his own project off the ground. The judge sided with Beatty, which meant that he now had 2 years to get into production on a Dick Tracy something. And so, a year and 11 months later, production began on what just might be one of the strangest TV specials ever made.
Oh, how are you, Detective Tracy?
I'm fine. Call me Dick, huh?
I'll try.
Shall I sit here?
Please do, yes.
It aired, unannounced, in the dead of night on Turner Classic Movies. For almost 30 minutes, film critic and historian Leonard Maltin interviews a 73-year-old Warren Beatty fully in character as an over-the-hill Dick Tracy.
I'm going to be 107 in
No.
July. Yes.
No.
Yeah.
107?
107.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have some secret you can share with everybody?
SP. Small portions.
Tribune wasn't so entertained and ended up suing Beatty, claiming that this bare-bones Dick Tracy special was not actually special enough to meet the terms of the contract.
Can we take your hat and coat?
I don't take off my hat and coat.
The two parties went back and forth in court until a judge eventually ruled that if an appearance in a Nancy Kerrigan ice skating special was special enough, so too was a silly 30-minute late-night interview on cable.
I've heard that Beatty is interested in making another movie about you.
Beatty. Making another movie about me. Yes, I've heard that. If he made another movie about me, I would take off my hat to him. Or I would tip it at least.
Warren Beatty had won. The film and TV rights to Dick Tracy were still his to use, just about however he wanted. And while he continued to assert that a new Dick Tracy was still in the works, the character wouldn't be seen for yet another decade, right around the time that the 2-year clock to retain his rights would once again start to tick.
Leonard, Dick Tracy has scheduled a Zoom call with me, and it's coming up any minute.
On another random Friday night, anyone that happened to be tuned into Turner Classic Movies would once again be treated to the one-and-done airing of Dick Tracy's special, Tracy Zooms In. Much like the original, a now 86-year-old Warren Beatty played Dick Tracy, being interviewed once again by Leonard Maltin. Though now, with the wonders of Zoom technology, Warren Beatty playing Warren Beatty could also show up.
I have an old friend or acquaintance of yours here.
Oh, really? What? Who? Yes, we haven't spoken in a while.
This was clearly another fast and loose production, all to prevent the Tracy rights from slipping away.
I think you've produced some really good movies. They were special. And you were quite good in them, but come on, in those movies, you never had yourself knocking out 7 guys with 1 punch like you did in the movie about me. I mean, come on, 7 guys with 1 punch?
Which all brings us back to the here and the now and highlights one of Dick Tracy's biggest mysteries. We're in the summer of 2025. It's been 35 years since Warren Beatty made his movie with Disney, and right now he's 88 years old. At this point, it's safe to come to a couple of conclusions. He's never gonna make another Dick Tracy movie, and he's not letting anyone else do it either. But why?
Actually, everybody wonders why you never made another Tracy movie. Am I right, Detective Tracy?
Well, I had always assumed that maybe Mr. Beatty wasn't very interested and didn't want to do anything. I don't know what to think about making movies nowadays. You say you don't know what to think about making movies now? Well, that's because things have changed so fast. People want to watch movies at home and put them on pause so they can use their cell phone, so they can break for dinner, so they can go to the toilet, so they can treat movies like books, so they can look at them, put them down, pick them up later. They don't want to have to drive to a theater. They don't want to have to park their car. They want to look at whatever they like whenever they want to look at it. Yeah, sure, sometimes they'll take the trouble to go to a theater and see a movie on a big screen, fine. But I say, if you're thinking about making another movie about me, would you think about maybe getting somebody a little younger than you to play me?
When looking at Warren Beatty's life and career as a whole, you start to recognize a pattern. Bonnie and Clyde is a movie about a young couple, unsatisfied with their place in life, who go on to break systemic rules and take destiny into their own hands, becoming media stars in the process. Behind the scenes, a young Beatty hadn't been happy with the acting work available to him, and so he went on to produce the film in a way that went completely counter to the Hollywood system, and it launched him into media superstardom.
One time I told you I was gonna make you somebody, that's what you done for me.
Shampoo is very much a parody of his highly publicized social life, with characters too self-absorbed to recognize the political chaos around them.
I'd like to suck his cock.
Reds explored aspects of Beatty's own journey and experiences with progressive politics, along with the harsh realities of extremism and revolution.
It's just the beginning, E.G. It's not happening the way we thought it would. It's not happening the way we wanted it to, but it's happening. If you walk out on it now, what's your whole life meant?
And then there's Ishtar, a film where Beatty is quite literally confronted with both aging and failure.
You're old, you're white, you got no shtick, you got no gimmicks.
Which, for one final time, brings us all back around to Dick Tracy.
What struck me about this guy Dick Tracy, had been around for 1 billion years, was that he just kept never getting married. And he was always with his Tess Trueheart, and he had no family, basically. And I think that's the thing that fueled me on Dick Tracy, that he was a good guy, basically, and, you know, he really was a sort of a star detective. And he ran around in his yellow coat and hat, and he didn't really make much advance in his personal life.
By the time he started production on Dick Tracy, Warren Beatty was in his mid-50s. He'd experienced the highs and lows of being a Hollywood playboy, and whether or not he knew it at the time, Beatty was ready to settle down. Just 1 year after the release of Dick Tracy, while on the set of his next film, Beatty would meet Annette Bening. They would fall in love, get married, have children, and just grow old together. All things that Detective Tracy and at one point Beatty himself would have never thought possible.
I love my profession. I love the movie profession. It introduced me to the person who's given me the most important thing of all, which is her love, and the love of our 4 children, Annette. I think I would have found you anyway, but I can also thank the movies for leading me to you.
For Warren Beatty, his films are much more than a commercial enterprise or a marketing vessel. There is art. Pieces of him, aspects of his life that he was consciously or not working through. And that's not something you can easily let go of. But unfortunately for him, that's all gonna change in 2027, because this is when the granddaddy of all artistic timers hits 0, and the character officially enters the public domain. For the first time in over 50 years, Warren Beatty will have to come to terms with the fact that Dick Tracy is no longer his. And that's something that no ice skating segment or bizarre interview special will ever change.
Maybe I should be played old by somebody who's able to do things old people can't ordinarily do.
And as wild and messy as the Dick Tracy film ended up being, its impact is still felt today. Major studios tightened their grip on creative control, took fewer risks with prideful visionaries, and restructured the financial and creative formulas behind modern blockbusters.
Disney's success in 2024 was fueled by our popular franchises and IP, including the top 3 movies of the year.
Warren Beatty helped shift Hollywood with Bonnie and Clyde, and as it turns out, he did it again with Dick Tracy, just not in the direction he had hoped. Warren Beatty is far from the only creative legend that's gone on quite a journey over their career. Check out my video on Dr. Seuss and some of his darkest days in Hollywood.